when the second network license or award is given out, you need the minister, and in this case Fahmi Fadil, to sign off on it. And as far as I know, that has not been done. That means even though MCMC has announced the award, it is not approved yet by the minister. Welcome back to the Are We OK podcast, the podcast that talks about public policies and politics in ways that are relevant to you guys. So I'm Mr. Botak, or Dr. Botak. The brain a little bit fried because I haven't recorded in 2 weeks already. And here we have...
Yeah, this is Mr. Money, Peter.
Maybe before we start, Peter, I just want to thank our audience, thank our subscribers. The last I checked, we've hit 31,200 subscribers.
That's right. Apparently, when I look at the data, right, there are many people watching the show, but there are more than 60% of them who actually did not hit the subscribe and notification button. So yeah, for those of you who are watching this right now, do help us to try to achieve this number, to bring it down to maybe say 40%, right? So that at least 60% of the viewers who are watching are already subscribed and notification turned on. Now, there's a benefit to it, which is whenever there's a latest episode, it will be served to you directly instead of waiting for YouTube algorithm to
push it to you.
Push it to you. Yeah, so you get the latest episode.
Yeah, we were not able to shoot last week because I was away on holiday.
Yes.
I went to Japan, my second time visiting. I went to Tokyo, Kyoto, and Osaka. Have you been to any of those cities before, Peter?
Yep, I've been to Tokyo, Kyoto, Osaka naturally, and then also all the way up to Akita. What's the most memorable thing for you this trip?
Probably the most memorable thing was I stayed at one of those restored shop houses that receive a protection status from the Kyoto government. So they have a lot of redevelopment, especially after the Second World War. And you had a lot of these old shop houses, it's just 2-story, very small buildings, being torn down and then replaced by high-rises and all that. So the Kyoto government, together with the national government, decided to come up with certain funds to preserve some of these shop lots. And it was very, very well refurbished. And what was amazing was that I discovered that this place was one of the 3 or 4 places in the whole of Japan that has a good sleep quality certification.
Oh, wow.
Meaning the noise levels is less than 5 decibels between the hours of 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. Yeah, maybe just one last thing about Japan. I can go on and talk a lot about Japan from a public policy perspective. But one of the things that I really found to be very admirable was the fact that in Japan, whether it's Tokyo, Osaka, Kyoto, you have very few rubbish bins.
Yes,
you have very few rubbish bins because people are expected to take rubbish back home.
Yes.
And then, when you dispose of rubbish, you put the rubbish out from your apartments and all that. You even have a covering for it, and it's very, very well organized and very clean. We'll move on to our first topic of today, which is the continued discussion on different aspects of the second 5G network. I thought it would be good for us to start, since we talk about communications and ministerial standards, was the parliamentary debate that took place a couple of weeks back, when we weren't able to record, whereby there were seemingly contradictory statements made by the Minister of Communications, Fahmi Fadil, regarding Digital Nasional Berhad, the entity that has successfully rolled out the first 5G network, and also the Minister of Digital, Gobind Singh, who is now responsible for DNB. So just to give our audience some context, what happened was, budget debate has two sort of like segments. The first segment is when you're talking about DASA, meaning policies. You can talk about any policy you like. And then after the discussion or after the debate, for this segment, individual ministries and ministers will answer questions that were raised during the DASA. The second part is what they call Jawatan Kuasa or committee, where you debate the specific allocation for each different items within each ministry, right? So this discussion or this debate took place a couple of weeks back, and in his reply, Fahmi Fadil replied, he talked about different things, but one of the last things he talked about in his part of the reply was with regards to the 5G network and also DNB's role in this 5G, the rolling out the first 5G network. And basically he said, I don't want to go too much into this because DNB is no longer under my responsibility or my powers earlier. It's under another ministry now, Ministry of Digital. But when it was under my ministry, when I went in there, what I found was something that was horrifying and scary. And the words that he used was menyeramkan, seram like a horror movie, and mencemaskan, basically something that needs immediate attention.
That's right.
So he threw out these two words, and then he said that even the then TKSP, who is now the KSP, the Chief Treasurer Secretary General, Dato Johan Marikan, didn't know what was going on within DNB. And then, this was widely reported and also circulated. And, I felt compelled to issue some tweets on this. So if let's say there were all these things that were very scary and very horrifying, right? I asked a few questions. I said, firstly, did Fahmi reveal this in public, right? Because, as minister, you should try to reveal, any possibility of wrongdoing, right? You want transparency. Secondly, what did he do about these kinds of issues that he found at DNB, right? Thirdly, what kind of follow-up issues, follow-up statements or follow-up actions did he undertake so that all these things could be resolved, and also whether or not MACC had any actions to be undertaken if let's say there was things that were not quite right lah. We see VV Yusof and all that being charged, right, after MACC went through their records and whatnot lah. So after I said all these tweets, I think it was covered in the media a little bit. Gobind Singh, then, who's the Minister of Digital, came out in his own reply in Parliament during the Jawatan Kuasa portion of the debate. He came out to say that when he took over as Minister, he wanted a proper report on DNB. He wanted MACC to do an investigation audit. And at the end of the day, what Gobind said was, everything was above board.
Yep.
You couldn't find anything that was wrong, and DNB did things by the book. Right, so from a communication standpoint, right, after explaining this, after reading some of these articles, right, what do you think happened in terms of these seemingly contradictory statements between the two ministers?
I was confused. Yeah, for one, when I read about that statement, I always thought DNB was doing quite an okay job, right? There didn't seem to be any complaint. But on the hand, we gotta ask you. So, firstly, did DNB did a good job per se during the time?
A couple of things that I wanted to highlight here. When I was in the opposition after the Sheraton move, this issue with regards to the first 5G network DNB was brought up by the then opposition, led by PMX, Anwar Ibrahim, and also Fahmi Fadil, who was given the role of him together with another MP, the MP for Ledang, the role of questioning why this single wholesale network model was used. Why was DNB given this responsibility? Why weren't the telcos, given the responsibility of having more than one network to roll out 5G? Right. So, in response, what DNB did was the then CEO Ralph Marshall, he actually briefed the opposition MPs. He said, "This is our plan. This is the amount of money that's going to be spent. Over 10 years. The money would not be government money." Right? Of course, Gobind later clarified to say that there was a capital injection to get DNB started, which amounted to, I think, 500 million ringgit. But most of the cost of the rollout, I think, was borne by DNB asking for bank loans, right? To fund the rollout, which would be paid by the telco players to subscribe to the 5G services. So the level of transparency there, I think, was much better than what I think we see now with regards to the award of the second network to UMobile.
So, because that's what I know in terms of information, right, that they actually did a not bad job. And then suddenly at the end of it, he just brings it out. And when he uses the word menyeramkan and mencemaskan, sounds like something is very wrong lah.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. But what is really surprising to me, right, is the fact that not only was there a lot of transparency, I think, in terms of briefing the MPs, the opposition MPs even, but DNB also managed to reach their KPI of reaching 80% of coverage of populated areas or COPA before their deadline. So I think the deadline, I think, if I'm not mistaken, was about 2024. Right. They reached it much earlier. In fact, it's already been reached already. And that was sort of like the triggering point for the process to start in terms of awarding the second network.
Right. In fact, they won some award, right?
Yeah, they won quite a number of awards, international awards. And what is funny is that Fahmi himself received one of these awards on behalf of DNB at the Mobile World Congress in Barcelona I think in the middle of 2023, before that ministry before DNB was shifted to the Ministry of Digital at the end of 2023 because of the cabinet reshuffle. Right? So, it really is very perplexing. It's like you threw DNB under the bus. It was like a hit and run kind of a situation. Because what our audience also needs to be aware of is that when you say things like menyeramkan and mencemaskan, right?
Yeah.
And said that certain people were not in the know and whatnot, right? You are inadvertently throwing people under the bus, right? So, for example, let's start with the current KSP, Johan Marikan. As Timbalan Ketua Setiausaha Perbendaharaan, or the TKSP, the deputy, one of the 3 deputies at the Ministry of Finance, he is not clued in on everything that happens in the ministry.
That's right.
Right? The person that would be clued in would be the KSP and also the Minister of Finance at that point in time. Tengku Zafrul, who would have known about what was going on at DNB at that time, would have been the KSP, a guy called Dato' Asri, who's no longer at the Ministry of Finance, and also the Minister of Finance at that time, who was Tengku Zafrul, now the MITI Minister. Right? So, so when he says all these things, right, menyeramkan dan mencemaskan, he is inadvertently, I'm not sure whether he realized this, throwing Tengku Zafrul under the bus, partly lah, right? Because at the time, DNB was 100% MOF owned, MOF Inc. owned entity. Second thing is, you are also giving a lot of pressure to Gobind Singh, who is in charge of DNB now, to say that, hey, you have to go and explain this so-called mess that DNB was in. And when Gobind has to come out to say, actually, we didn't find anything wrong when I got in there, and MACC seemed to have cleared DNB of any wrongdoing, then people will be confused. What was the thing that was so horrifying and worrying that you had to bring it out, but no clarity was given, no explanation was given.
Yeah,
right?
Precisely, right? So I was thinking to myself, the words that were being used sounded like there's something. I mean, literal words, not even sounded. It was horrifying and worrying, and something need action immediately. There were a few things that came to my mind, right? Number one is that it was under your purview for about a year plus. It was under your purview, right?
Correct.
Nothing was being raised.
And you happily went to receive awards.
That's right. Yeah, and I think there were a couple of times also you said that they did a good job. And now suddenly you said that there's something worrying, right?
There was something worrying.
Yeah, there was something worrying. Now then you put the Ministry of Digital in a weird position because this is a new extra problem that leads to a new set of questioning. Where probably earlier it's like, at least I can focus on other things. Now I need to focus on this. Because even as a minister, if I want to vouch for it, I need to make sure that I can vouch for it, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So I may end up re-looking at all the previous things that has happened just to investigate one more round to be sure, right? I felt, it was like, what are you trying to say?
So I don't think that's going to happen. Of course, I think one thing that Gobind can do to assuage the larger public that due diligence was done is, he did refer to a letter that MACC sent to him to say that, they cleared DNB of, any wrongdoing that they could find. They couldn't find, So if let's say that letter from MACC, if it's not subject to any Official Secrets Act, Gobind can publish that letter. And then that will put a stop to any further speculation as to whether or not DNB followed protocol. And it's not just under Gobind's ministry, or even Fahmi when he was minister. It will be future ministers who may want to question the whole DNB thing again. So that's one. Second thing is, I think what would be horrifying and also scary for investors and others would be the way in which the second 5G network has been awarded in terms of the lack of transparency and also the potential of further complications in terms of rolling it out that we'll talk about, right? Because recent news came out last weekend. The largest shareholder, basically, with about 49% of UMobile, which is a private entity, is a sort of like a venture capital company called STT that is ultimately owned and controlled by Temasek in Singapore. It was reported that they sold their stakes, up to 51% of their stakes, to an entity that's basically controlled by two of the largest Malaysian shareholders, Vincent Tan, and also somebody linked to the Johor royalty. This issue will continue to have leaks because then people are asking now, if STT could sell a 51% to dilute its interest to 20%, it means that its own shareholding was more than 49%, which is sort of like the limit for foreign shareholdings for any entity that was given this telco license. Now, of course, there's involvement of royalty, which makes it more complex as well. And also, and this is going behind the curtain quite a bit, especially for those who are aware of these telco machinations. This is not the end of the story, because there's been a lot of speculation in the past, and that speculation continues, that the largest shareholders after this transaction, namely Vincent Tan and also people in the Johor royal family, they would be bought out by Maxis. That means Maxis will acquire UMobile. Of course, now they have to pay a higher premium because the second 5G network belongs to UMobile.
Right.
And this is a way in which everyone can so-called be taken care of in terms of their financial interests. But let me ask you this. Who is the largest shareholder or the controlling shareholder of Maxis, as far as you know?
Another Christian?
The late Ananda Krishnan.
Another Christian.
Right, so his now, those shareholdings, which is the largest, one of the entities that he controls, which is called BGSM, controls about 60% of Maxis shares. But with his passing now, who will be able to speak on AK's behalf in terms of his estate, so to speak?
That's another complicated story.
Right? So, for this kind of large-scale acquisition, right, for Maxis to take over UMobile, right, it will be tricky. You need shareholders' approval, but your major shareholder has passed away. So, any discussion about how you're going to possibly take over UMobile will probably
Be on hold.
Yes,
Wow.
exactly. At the same time, some people have said, UMobile may want to go IPO in order to raise money to fund the second 5G network. It's possible. But now, with all the different kinds of speculations that's happening now with regards to the shareholding, sale or not sale, how much you're going to spend and all that kind of stuff, right? Do you think UMobile can give investors the kind of transparency to be able to do an IPO now? Probably not. So that's why this situation actually is not done with just the announcement of the second 5G award to UMobile. And this is something that has not been reported yet, but through my sources and through my understanding in terms of discussing with different people, when the second network sort of like a license or award is given out, right, you need the minister, and in this case Fahmi Fadil, to sign off on it. And as far as I know, that has not been done. That means even though MCMC has announced the award, it is not approved yet by the minister, as far as I know. Of course, UMobile is not obliged to disclose this because it's not a listed entity. But the minister should have some clarification in terms of this sort of like a award, correct?
Right.
Whether he needs to sign off on it, that's something that he needs to explain to the public, because I know from discussions with people in the know that it has to be signed off and approved by the minister. Right? And finally, on this issue, one of the most interesting things that Gobind said, in addition to saying that DNB was in the clear, was that the government needs to be paid off in terms of their sort of like initial equity injection, the 500 million plus and so, and also some of the borrowings they gave to DNB, total of about 800 or 900 million. The government of Malaysia needs to be paid off first before the second 5G network can be rolled out. So who's going to pay off the government? Is it going to be UMobile? Is it going to be all the telcos together? We don't know yet. Right. So this ties in, I think, quite nicely to the next segment, which we'll talk about after the break, where Anwar has been complaining about the slow rollout or the slow decision-making process with regards to two things. One is the National Digital ID. The second thing is the second 5G network.
So before we go into that part, right, just one last one. Do you think Fahmi Fazil made that statement as part of distraction in that sense?
I don't think that Fahmi may have given sufficient thought to the kind of implications and repercussions of saying things like menyeramkan and mencemaskan. I think it was almost a throwaway statement, almost as if he was playing a role and maybe doing some play acting, trying to refer back to the time when he was in opposition and he was taking the lead following Anwar to attack DNB and also to attack the single wholesale network model for the 5G network. So he may have been in that mind frame, in that mode, without realizing that one of his current cabinet ministers' colleagues was involved in the award of the first 5G contract to DNB. And then also, one of his current colleagues, Gobind Singh, is currently managing DNB. And whatever negative repercussions that will come out from the award of the second 5G network, it will have an impact on DNB and also Gobind and also the Ministry of Finance. Sorry, we took a bit longer to delve into this particular issue. I thought since I'm quite familiar with this issue, I needed to have this platform to be able to explain as much as possible to our audience and especially to those people who are interested in this whole 5G issue. So be right back after this. Welcome back to the Are We OK podcast. For the second section, I'd like to talk about a recent news item, which is PMX expressing his frustration with two issues when he was chairing a recent meeting on this fourth IR. And he referred specifically to the slow rollout of the second 5G network, which we've talked about a little bit already, and also the slow rollout of the National Digital ID. Let's focus on this National Digital ID, and then we'll talk about some of the larger policy implications. Just to recap and give our audience a flavor, what you may not know is that the National Digital ID project is something that is currently parked under the Prime Minister's office. And there are good reasons for why I think this project needed to have the Prime Minister to kickstart it. Because in the past, it has been under MCMC, it has been under MOSTI, it never really took off. So I think what somebody advised Anwar was, okay, put it under your ministry, and because it's under the Prime Minister's office, there will be, or the Prime Minister's department, there will be more backing and easier for you to coordinate across different ministries to get this project done. The award for designing the National Digital ID was given to MIMOS. 80 million ringgit, no tender. It was just given. This is what was reported, and this was what I was told as well. And the mandate given to MIMOS at the time was to design the National Digital ID as a single sign-on sort of like a process. Single sign-on, for those of you who don't know, basically means that if you use the National Digital ID and you sign on with that ID, you can use that ID to access all sorts of different government services and software. So an analogy or very simple thing that everyone here would be able to understand would be, I use a single sign-on to sign on to my Google account. And then I just need to approve other apps to sign on to other apps.
That's right.
So we can do this for any whole host of other apps. As long as there's some sort of API where it's easy for you to connect from one app to another, this can be done under the National Digital ID. Right, so PMX is concerned that this National Digital ID has been rolled out to civil servants, but there are no sort of like use cases, right? There are no use cases, which means the adoption of the National Digital ID has not really been very good. Which is why I think he or somebody in the PMO gave the directive for JPJ to make it mandatory at one point in time for people to want to sign on to the JPJ app to use the National Digital ID. Of course, that was reversed by Anthony Loke when he realized that the National Digital ID wasn't ready for it. Right. So let me sort of draw you behind the curtain on this particular issue, which is, I think there is some level of capacity gap and also understanding on the part of PMX, on the part of the Prime Minister's office, with regards to what this National Digital ID is supposed to do and how it can function effectively SSO that is safe and secure. What do I mean by this? So since the National Digital ID was launched about maybe, I think 6 months to a year ago, there have been a number of new applications, both software and hardware stuff, that has been announced by the Malaysian government. I'll give you a few examples. My Border Pass. Have you heard of it before? My Border Pass is an app that allows you to scan your passport, to use that app to be able to do immigration clearance between Johor and Singapore and to make it faster.
Just straight away cross through.
Yes.
With face recognition, right?
Yes. So the idea is good. But why is that not integrated with the National Digital ID? Right? Because if let's say you can have your National Digital ID, you will be able to use that to access immigration data or give access to whichever apps wants you to use your immigration data, including your passport. That's one. Second thing is, there was an announcement earlier this year, a few months ago, I think 2 months ago, there will be an issuance of new IC cards with enhanced security features. Right? So if that's the case, why not use that also to do something that's very important for the national digital ID to be a truly national ID, which is you must have some sort of a physical verification of who you are as a process of registering for your national digital ID. What do I mean by this? It's a little bit complex, but I try to make it simple for you guys. When you register for, let's say, your digital bank, do you have any digital bank apps?
Yes.
I have 3. I registered for GX Bank, for Aeon, and also for Boost. And all 3 of them have some sort of eKYC system, right? And the eKYC basically says, scan your face,
that's right,
scan your IC. And if there's a match using whatever software that they are using, then I'll be able to register you. Takes about a day. That process does not require any physical verification and is about 70% correct, because 70 or 80% are depending on how good your eKYC system is. Because sometimes your face changes.
That's right.
Sometimes your IC got reflection.
That's right.
Sometimes the IC also, the photo has faded and whatnot.
That's right.
Right. And also, sometimes there are cases where, there are twins involved. Those are actually not national digital IDs. Those are digital IDs that you use for different purposes. For it to be national, you need to have some sort of 100% verification point where you go to somewhere, a government department or government ministry, where you do, for example, thumbprint, right? Which we have already, access to your JPN records, your National Registration Department records, or iris recognition or whatever, right? So only with that, then can you verify that this is the national digital ID that can be used for your single sign-on for any government as well as non-government act. And this is something that they've done in Singapore. This is something that they've done in India, where they've rolled out national digital IDs to over 1 billion people.
Yep.
So when PMX says, why is the process so slow, right? I'm not sure whether he understands you need to have that physical verification part to go out to get people to, find out more about this national digital ID through that physical verification process. And then using that physical verification process also to say that, by the way, that there is this My Border Pass thing that you can use to go from Johor to Singapore. There's this thing that you can use, for SSO to register for your PADU, right? Which Rafizi says they will open up for a new round of registrations.
Yep.
So there are all these use cases, right, that are being rolled out that can utilize the national digital ID.
Yeah.
But the government isn't coordinating. And I'm not sure whether in that meeting where Anwar expressed his frustration, right, whether anyone told him all these things or not.
So I'm actually very curious about this whole thing, right? Because we are not the first in the world to roll out.
Correct.
There are a number of countries who have already rolled out. And I spoke to certain individuals who are in the private sector, obviously, who are involved in the rolling out. From what I can see, why not we engage these people to help with the rolling out? Because it seems like it is at this level, maybe due to lack of information, it looks more like a both coordination and planning kind of issue, rather than like there's no technology available or what. And there are already people in the market who are quite familiar with it.
Yes.
So the question is, why is it very hard to find the people? Because if I can meet these people just by over a coffee or or certain events, I don't think it's that hard to find.
Okay, so this is my educated guess. I don't think even Anwar himself would dispute, and the people who are close to him, that Anwar or PMX will be much more comfortable in a setting where they're discussing philosophy rather than technology or artificial intelligence. I think in that kind of context, right, a lot of these things that I'm talking about, the need for physical verification for your NDID, how to link it to use cases, how to do APIs, for example, to make it much more easier to link from private from public to private, and all the other security issues that needs to be resolved in this kind of setting, right? Frankly speaking, I don't think it's fair for us to put that kind of expectation that Anwar, that PMX will understand all this, right?
Yeah, I think it's fair. It's fair to say that, because it's rather high tech, and it's also, you have so many things on your plate.
Correct.
So to not know in detail is fair.
Right. So, and at the same time, I also think that there may not be that many people in the context of those kinds of technology-related meetings that can tell the PM maybe this is the right policy approach, right? And even somebody whom I thought would have known better because he's had experience running his own big data company, even Rafizi, I've been very public about this. I think he messed up the rollout of PADU in terms of registration. And he was not able to see how you needed, it would have been much better to actually have coordination with the National Digital ID project as a way to register people for PADU. He wanted to do his own thing and we saw what happened as a result. So within that ecosystem, there doesn't seem to be anyone setting the policy framework. So my recommendation would be this. Okay, now that PMO has initiated the National Digital ID project, it is time to pass it on to another ministry, because the structure within the PMO is just not really right, or they do not have the kind of policy expertise to be able to continue the rollout and do the coordination. So the right ministry to do this, in my humble opinion, is actually the Ministry of Digital. You park the NDID project under the Ministry of Digital, and hopefully the minister will be able to get good advisors to help him out on this. And one very simple thing that the minister can do. The minister can go out to sign some sort of a G2G arrangement or G2G agreement with India and with Singapore to learn the best practices on how they did this. India, because you have to learn how to do it in terms of the physical verification part in rural areas that Singapore doesn't have. Singapore, I think, is much easier because closer and also they've had 10 years of experience of doing this. And when Singapore first rolled it out, they got consultants involved, Accenture and others, to help a lot on the back-end side. Exactly what you're talking about. There could be others, vendors that could be part and parcel of this process. But to project manage this, it cannot be in the PMO because there's no minister there who's handling this.
It's too technical.
Exactly.
It's also too technical.
Exactly. So that's why I think it's much more suitable to be parked under the Ministry of Digital. Of course, Gobin is probably, still learning in terms of the technical aspects, but he can be aided by his KSU, by others in MDAC, for example, who do know a lot about these things. And MDAC, for example, can sign a G2G with, GovTech Singapore. And there's also, from what I understand, a GovTech unit, not official yet, but a sort of like an entity that is parked under Gobin's ministry right now. Right? So that could be something that could be done, but I'm not sure whether or not Gobin is willing to stick his neck out to ask for this responsibility, and I'm not sure whether PMX realizes that it's better for him to let go of this responsibility to give it to somebody else. Right? So I think the larger point that I'm trying to make here is that this is a challenge that I think we have seen PMX undergo, and also his administration, which is the policy environment that PMX is operating under now is very different from the 1990s, which is more than 25 years ago, because policy mechanisms and parameters are much more complex. We are actually dealing with a lot of things where there are sort of like international examples that we can utilize, that we can learn from, that there have been mistakes made, that we can update so that we don't repeat those mistakes. And this is where I think the past way of doing things may not be applicable now. And there's also another important point. When PMX was last in government, he was also 25 years younger, right? So this happens to everyone. When you're 77, 78, you're almost reaching 80. Your ability to absorb, your ability to process information is actually very different, from when you were in your 50s, when you're in your 60s. Right? So, this is, I think, a policy issue that, I have kept track of for quite some time already. And I just wanted to raise up this gap, or these many gaps, to say that I understand why PMX is frustrated. But I think there are ways in which he can empower others to be able to take on some of these responsibilities. Any questions on your part on this?
No, I just think that this is something that should be given a lot of attention. The reason being is because there's a lot of policies that we have been talking about and PM has been talking about, which actually hinges upon the success of national ID, or either a mechanism to have a thorough information given. For example, from subsidy to everything else, right? To even a more fair and transparent distribution of grants and so on and so forth.
So that is actually a very important point, because for the National Digital ID is something that is not just applicable for individuals. You can also roll it out for companies.
That's right. Yeah. Because one of the biggest intransparency is that when a lot of the grants are being given and so on and so forth, there is the question of who owns it, right? And and here everything is being linked up quite easily.
Yes.
There's still ways of actually hiding and stuff like that, but at least, let's say just by improving transparency by 50-60%, it's going to have a lot of savings.
Yes.
Yeah, immediately your coffers is scouting. Yeah, and again, this is how I see it as well. As a PM or as even a ministry, sometimes you may not be the most technical person, but you need to have the willpower to carry out a vision.
Yeah,
and that's what matters.
And you
right?
empower others
That's
who
right.
can assist and advise you.
That's right.
On the policy parameters.
That's right. Yeah, it's just like today, even in this small company, I'm not good in a lot of things. We just make sure that people who are good are here to roll out those and implement those things, right? So I have to say that I'm actually quite surprised that why is this not the number one priority lah?
Sure.
Yeah, but instead it has to be wait until say complaints or anything and I was thinking myself, right? Our PM has finally complained because Singapore has complained so many times already.
Yeah, of course. I mean, there are a lot of priorities that the PM has to face lah. But I think for this one, truth of the matter is that I think many of our ministers don't realize the potential of the NDID. They've not seen or compared examples from Singapore, from India, and they have not really given much thought as to how this very small thing, in the larger scheme of things, but potentially catalytic process or application or tool can be used in many of the things their own ministries
That's right.
can roll out.
Yeah.
Right? So we'll continue to keep track of this to see whether there's any progress that's being made. Frankly speaking, if this project remains under the PMO, I think the same kind of frustrations will be heard again in another 6 months. So be right back after this, where we're going to talk about flood relief efforts. Welcome back to the third segment of the Are We OK podcast, and right now we want to shift our efforts to flood relief. So, I'm going to admit something right from the start. Usually at the end of the year, when I was an MP, I would be very, very afraid of taking holidays because I'm afraid that if there's going to be any floods or whether major or minor,
you better be there.
Yes, you better be there. Right? And let's say they find out that you're holidaying in Japan and all that. It would be terrible for media. And when the news started filtering out very serious floods happening in Kelantan, Terengganu, and then I see parts of Negeri Sembilan, Ipoh even, having serious floods, brought me back to memories of 2015 when, I'm not sure whether you remember, Kelantan, very heavy floods. That's there. Right. And that time, the Adun for Blakong, the late Eddie Ng, actually organised a convoy of maybe about 20 cars, a few lorries and all that to go and send relief and also to help out on some of the cleaning stuff in parts of Kelantan. And we actually did it over New Year. So we spent New Year's Eve, myself and a few other colleagues, right, on the highway at the rest stop eating McDonald's near Genting Highlands because we were on our way back. Right. So, still can remember those efforts. And then, of course, more recently, the very serious floods in Selangor in 2021 that, where we had to do a lot of post-flood relief efforts. So I think on this part, PMX did the right thing in terms of saying that, look, cancel the leave of all the ministers, saying that they should focus on the flood relief efforts. And he also announced additional allocation of 50 million for Kelantan and also Terengganu to help out with the flood reliefs. He also went down to Terengganu, I think, to talk to the Menteri Besar there and to see, some of the flood victims and whatnot. So I think from an optics perspective, it seemed to have been quite well managed.
Yep.
I also want to draw the audience behind the curtains a little bit, in a sense that when PMX say, okay, cancel leave, all the cabinet ministers have to get involved in some way or other. It would have been good if PMX could say, look, not all of your ministries have the capabilities of doing direct flood relief efforts, right? That means, I'm not expecting MITI to go and send boats and all that to go and, evacuate people and whatnot. So different ministries have different responsibilities.
That's right.
And there will be some that are more important during the floods, whether it's welfare, whether it's rural development, whether it's defense. And there will be some that are more important after the floods, right? So, for example, on cleaning services, you need SW Corp, which is under the Ministry of Housing and Local Government. So, if let's say the optics could have gone beyond just cancelling and cancelling the leave, but say we have a plan. I'm going to set up a war room in PMO that will direct all this, not just during the floods, but after the floods as well. We're going to work with the state governments in Kedah, in Kelantan, in Terengganu, to not just roll out relief during the floods, but also after that in a very systematic way. And we're going to keep track of it. At the end of 2-3 months, including the follow-up, we're going to issue a report. So something like this, to me, is more meaningful, especially when it comes to long-term planning for this kind of flood relief effort.
So actually, I have a question about this. Because just when you say, right, I remember 2015, right? In my mind, I was like, but every year also flood. So I don't know which year you're talking about in the sense, right? So
some years are more serious than others.
Some years are more serious, right? Then I was thinking to myself, right? The thing is that when you say 2015, right, then I realized, right, oh wow, it's been 9 years by now, right? And actually, it extends way beyond that. It's been 10 years or more that Malaysia has been experiencing a flood and so on. Yeah, partially it's climate change. But why does it take so long to solve this issue? Is it really climate change is that bad that every time they dig the drain deeper or create more pipes, then the water volume become higher or what? Because as far as I'm concerned, Smart Tunnel 1 project that was well done kind of solved the problem for quite a long term. Yeah, and so then the question is, why so long? So
I think each area and each state will have their own unique challenges, which is why you need to have these longer term initiatives, these reports that are publicly published, so that we can keep track of some of the flood relief or flood mitigation efforts. So let's bring us back to Selangor, where I'm more familiar with. I'm not so familiar with Kelantan and Terengganu, but I can make some educated guesses. So for Selangor, one of the worst affected areas was Taman Sri Muda, near Shah Alam. So one of the things that I saw with my eyes was that it's not just the fact that that whole area was quite low-lying, and it has always been experiencing floods for a long time, but just not to that level of seriousness. So I think what I managed to see both during and after the floods was the following. After the floods, we had a very proactive Menteri Besar working together with the then Exco, Eng Zihan, who was in charge of local government, to deploy a lot of resources to do the cleaning of rubbish and to do the collection of rubbish. This is together with all the different contractors that are in charge of collecting rubbish. The state government came out with the money to pay them and to collect all the your furniture that cannot be used, and the MB gave KPI. After 2 weeks, I want all this to be cleaned. And I saw, because I visited the affected area about 1 week after the floods to give some aid to some of the people there. And then I went again about a month later to follow up on one particular family where the kids hadn't gotten vaccination yet. I took the kids to get vaccinated. So I could see, the rubbish was definitely cleaned up, right? So that's one. And then because the Adun of the area at that time, Kota Kemuning, Gana Patira, who is now the Klang MP, he also, provided some updates in terms of some of the repairing that went on with some of the flood pumps and floodgates along the Klang River close to Taman Sri Muda. So those were improved, and then later on when there was some heavy rain, I heard that those pumps were functioning accordingly. As to long-term stuff in terms of raising the bunds and all that kind of stuff, those will take a lot more money. But at least you could see that there is a plan that was put in place. It was executed short-term and then long-term, and more or less they know what to do. Right, and including the money that needs to be spent for long-term mitigation. But for places like Kelantan and Terengganu, because it involves much larger areas,
that's right,
there's much less transparency. We don't know the difference between flooding in, let's say, Kuala Terengganu versus Kuala Nerus. Right? So that's why it's not just sufficient, I think, for these kinds of short-term optic moves to be made, but you need longer-term planning. You need the different ministries to get involved through some sort of flood task force.
Correct.
To try to address these issues for the longer term.
That's right. So I was thinking of myself, because when I was thinking about this issue, right, I was thinking of myself, right, number one, the places where it floods, it doesn't change. It's not like this year, this place flood, the other place flood, right? I mean, just talk about Kota Damansara alone, where our office in roughly, when it rains, we know where it's going to flood already. Yeah. So number one, it doesn't change. And so for the past 15 years, things doesn't change. It tells a story in a sense, right? Like, unless the attitude is, this year flood until never mind lah, change a bit, wait till flood until the chest, then there's something wrong, right? Yes. And number two, yes, I think it requires a lot of money for certain actions to be made. But you're talking about more than 10 years already, You're not talking about this 1-2 years you can't raise fund.
Sure.
More than 10 years. Now, and the last thing that I think involves here is that this could be a little bit sensitive, but I always question, shouldn't we have a more coordinated way of doing town planning as part of the project? Because you already I don't think the government is that ignorant to know that certain areas are prone to flood or not. Then shouldn't there be certain kind of measurements being taken place? Like if let's say this is a more flood prone area, developers who develop there, you make sure you do something.
Okay, I'll start with the town planning part and then I'll go to some of the larger issues. On town planning, in the urban areas in Selangor, in Penang and others that I'm a bit more familiar with, there are already guidelines in terms of development with regards to flood mitigation measures that you need to put in. So for example, if let's say you want to build a high density condo in an area where it's flood prone, you need to put in some money to make sure that you enhance the water retention capabilities, build an additional water retention pond or better drains for runoff to water retention pond further down the development, things like that. So whether or not those things are executed and put in the plan, that depends on each PBT, each local authority, right? So that kind of transparency, I think, probably can be enhanced, but the structures and the frameworks are already there. And in terms of, now we talk about big data and stuff like that, right? And data analytics. There are already reports that you can use and generate from publicly available data, and one company that I'm quite familiar with is a company called Urban Metry, that you can actually produce or ask for flood reports of different areas, and it will be furnished to you free through one of their publicly available applications, which are used at a higher level by some developers. That is sort of like the town planning framework and also execution part. But in terms of doing the larger scale flood mitigation infrastructure investments, your bunds, your larger water retention areas, you may have to build not just drains, but much larger, sort of like a conversion of sewers into the rivers that we see sometimes in the Klang Valley. That actually can be done from an accountability perspective, right? By federal government saying to, let's say, the Terengganu state government, hey, I know you have all this Wang Esan coming in from your petroleum royalties that has been a subject of dispute between the federal and the state government because of different parties involved. Why not we work together? We put money, federal government come out with money that can be put into this flood mitigation fund. You come out with some money from your petroleum royalties, and we put this fund where both of us can monitor and have jurisdiction over, and then we have joint accountability in terms of the different flood mitigation projects that we want to do. Right? So this can be a way to say that, look, I'm willing to share the credit with you. And if, let's say, I can reap the political rewards, maybe 1 or 2 election cycles down the road because I'm seen as competent, good. Yeah. But if cannot, never mind, the public will still benefit. Right? So at least there's a little bit more policy innovation, so that it's not just optics. I go down when there's a flood, I wear my jacket and go down, give some aid, announce additional money, and then after that, the cycle repeats every 2-3 years.
Because with the way that things are, right, from how it looks like is that it becomes if anyone want to do well politically, you will welcome the flood season. you get what I mean? It turns into an opportunity, isn't it?
But this is the thing, again, having experienced this personally, I think the larger public, right, they are quite jaded right now, because the idea of, suddenly there's a flood, politician go there, to go and give aid, to maybe nowadays even to kayak and all that, maybe less novelty already compared to before, right? Because it's been done. I mean, I've done that myself, right? So what the Rakyat wants now is, okay, you need to show up, but we want to see long-term solutions.
After that, what are you going to do?
So if you are a government, whether it's state or the federal level, that can propose and deliver on these kinds of solutions, right, the political benefits will be there, right? But it may only come a bit later when people see the results of what you've done, right? So so that's a bit more in terms of both optics in the short term, and also important longer-term policy changes that needs to be thought of and implemented, so that long-term positive change can come, so that over time, hopefully, the flood mitigation measures will yield fruits. Any other issues that you want to bring up? Questions?
I think just a personal sharing of even the location that I'm living in. It's a very. Remember, I've been telling you that the road in front of my house, right? It's always in bad condition, right? So recently,
this is in Kota Damansara
in U3, Shah Alam.
U3. Okay, right? Okay. Yep.
So couldn't get anyone and everything all until recently. Managed to approach Kusha gave me the contact of Mandy, another local councillor.
Okay.
And then she put me through with YB is one. Yeah. And
The Adun in your area.
the Adun in my area. And then only I realized one thing. They told us that apparently our road is not registered because it used to be a farming area, right?
Okay.
Then after that, they built another road in.
So it's not recognized as
a road. But there's tukai, there's everything. There's collection of rubbish. It's just the road itself is not recognized. So therefore, no one is taking responsibility to maintain the road.
Correct.
So it got so frustrated. Apparently, every year, what happens is that if the Adun feels like there's a need, he'll do a special allocation to fix the road.
Yeah, it's called a Maris allocation.
Something like that. Then she was telling me that. And I was like, this is not sustainable. Can you send someone? So they are now sending someone apparently. But I know the process is going to take so long. In the end, I go and buy the quota myself. I learn on YouTube how to fix it. I go and fix the road myself right now. So over the past few days, that's what I've been busy with.
Okay.
Going back in the afternoon when it's not rain just to fix it up.
Are you the only house on that road? I hope
no,
not,
there
right?
were a couple. So after I started fixing it, then my neighbors like, hey, why are you doing it alone? Let me help you. Then they contributed, but I bought all the tar and everything. And I realized that actually it's not cheap to fix a road. Yeah, it's really quite expensive.
So my advice to you, Peter, would be to get the Residents Association involved if you have one.
Don't have that.
Correct.
There's an UMNO branch up there. But my point I want to make is this, right? It kind of shows and tell a similar situation with this flood mitigation thing, that a lot of the measures sometimes is very short term. It is almost like, because so short term, it sometimes turns into this goody kind of mentality a little bit, that when I do it for you, then you become dependent on me.
Then you feel obliged to support me.
Right? Okay. But rather than that, they should be actually looking at more long-term solution on how it can benefit overall. Like, for example, I can't believe that after so many years, the road wasn't registered.
Yeah, it's not gazetted as a proper road.
I mean, if like 10 years ago, you would have just...
Yeah, that was the developer's responsibility.
There's no developer because it was a compensated land by government last time when there was a certain housing area to make way for the Subang Airport development. Yeah. So my point is that
somebody should be more proactive to try to resolve these things.
That's right. Yeah, yes. And I feel like in this is a very small scale reflection of what's happening with the flood mitigation, in my opinion.
Okay. So good sharing. We'll come back for the final segment where we're going to talk about the amendments to the Communications and Multimedia Act 1983. Be right back. Welcome back to the fourth and final segment of the Are We OK podcast. Peter, we're going to jump straight into the, I think, most probably controversial amendment or bill that is tabled during this session, apart from the citizenship amendment. This, I think, has invited a lot of attention from civil society, academics, and maybe other media organizations as well, which is the amendment to the Communications and Multimedia Act 1983. Right. So before we go into the discussion on the detailed amendments, when it comes to the CMA 1983, this is under MCMC. Basically, an act that governs different kinds of communication modes and also different punishments under this communication channels, so to speak. It's different from the Printing Presses and Publications Act. That one is under the Ministry of Home Affairs, right? So for CMA, when I was in opposition and even before that, one of the constant issues that would be brought up by the then opposition was Section 233 of the CMA. Basically, a provision that was quite vague that allowed MCMC to investigate and then recommend for prosecution different kinds of acts by politicians and activists and others. So, for example, in the past, Fahmi Reza, quite well-known activist and artist, has been, I think, prosecuted under Section 233 of the CMA multiple times. I think probably too many for him to count as well. Going back to these amendments, I think not only did the current government not repeal Section 233, which was something that the opposition then advocated for, but Section 233 has been enhanced, and some of the punishments have also been added. And some of the details, I'm sure you'll have your own views on this as well, has sort of like give a lot of cause for concern among NGOs such as Article 19 and also Lawyers for Liberty and even some academics, one particular academic from Taylor's, Benjamin Loh, who has been very critical of these amendments. So, from your reading of these reports, what is your own feeling about this?
Scary, man. Number one, for a very long time, we talked about like the draconian law and everything. And then...
whether Seditions Act or
Sedition
PPPA
Acts,
or the CMA, yes?
I think free society should be built upon the ability to express yourself freely, definitely within certain limits, right? But it's better to give more freedom and then try to control certain things rather than not giving freedom and then occasionally allowing freedom, because then you will stifle a lot of innovation and so on, and artistic and cultural sharing and so forth. My personal thought, on the other hand, is that because today I myself is involved in the media industry, and this means that this particular podcast itself is also vulnerable to this enhancement of laws. And you're talking about it in such a way where it's not even draconian anymore. No, it's worse than that. It's almost like if someone were to take it to the extreme, because the nature of it is so vague.
Yeah, it's like grossly offensive.
That's right. Yeah.
Who is going to interpret what grossly offensive means? Let's say under section 233.
When they say that as long as it's based on facts or opinion of matter, again, there's no clear-cut line. Number one, who's facts? Does it mean that tomorrow Onion News come out it's facts? Does it mean that when my staff posted 3 posts, we get collectively everyone posts and then I can claim it as opinion of fact?
Or what happens if, let's say, one government official comes up with something, this set of opinions or so-called facts, and then another government official come up with something that's quite different.
That's right. I mean,
which is an example we dealt with in this particular show.
Yeah, like just the first section itself, right? So who should be penalized right now, right? And then there is almost the basis to call for an investigation or the basis to penalize someone. Again, it's not well defined. It is sesuka hati saya, right?
Very vague and broad.
Yeah. It's like as long as I interpret it as. So then now, it is no more a rule of law. It becomes a set of documents to empower whoever who is in power as and will they wish to exercise according to their interpretation now. So this becomes worse than draconian, in my opinion.
Yeah. So let me read what Article 19 an NGO has said. It says, Article 19 and CIJ, Centre for Independent Journalism, have long called for the repeal of sections 211 and 233 of the CMA, as their broad scope and vague wording lead to arbitrary interpretations. The provisions also do not meet the international freedom of expression standards, especially the 3-part test, legitimate aim, provided by law, proportionate and necessary. And what they have said with regards to these amendments is that it is extremely concerning that the new proposed texts have not been amended to meet the 3-part test. On the contrary, they remain vague, overly broad in scope, and hinge upon highly subjective terms open to a broad range of interpretations, despite the provided explanatory notes. And on Section 233, this includes expansive and vague terms such as feeling of disgust due to lewd portrayal. So that means if, let's say, I feel that your face is one kind one and it offends me, then I'm just
it's not being specific, right?
Content which is profane in nature, evil threats, crude references, and hate speech, among others. We are particularly concerned by the inclusion of hate speech under the amended provision, and what constitutes as grossly offensive fails to meet international standards of restrictions of speech and expression. Right. So I think what my concern is that this government, I think, feels under a lot of pressure whenever it is being attacked using 3R issues, rightly or wrongly, right? And of course, Anwar has come out to say, you can criticize me personally, but don't go and touch the Raja, right? The royalty, right? And of course, sometimes I do feel myself that the opposition is actually very irresponsible in terms of how they try to provoke some of these 3R issues. I think one good example would be some of the narratives that have come out as a result of these signboard, in different languages and whatnot. We won't go into that, but just to use that as an example. But is the proper reaction with all these 3R issues, is it really to go and strengthen 233 of the CMA in ways that, if let's say PH was still in opposition, they definitely would have protested against it?
Yeah.
Is that the way to go about doing this?
No, man, it's how do I say it? Like, we understand, but now that the way that it's being put, literally, right? You know, last time we say, "Yong sui mo zui."
That means
you don't look good, it's okay, one.
it's not offense lah.
Now, you don't look good, you can go jail. Don't
because feelings of disgust due to lewd portrayal.
See your face, and then say, "Hey, imagine one day, right? You have a new minister or someone who is in charge, right? Who don't like botak people." Koyak lah.
Or I think more worrying for me, right? If let's say, suddenly a botak minister is appointed, and then this person, Fahmi Reza, whoever, comes out with a caricature that makes botak people look stupid, right? And then suddenly the minister say, "Hey, this one lewd portrayal and it's crude and offensive."
Right. Now, the first person who will get very affected by this whole thing is actually stand-up comedy. Koyak, the whole stand-up comedy is to have fun, right?
So like, hey, Jason Leong, Douglas Lim, all these fellas, better be careful lah.
You better not make jokes, man.
Harith Iskandar, so cannot make jokes that could be potentially interpreted as
And not just that, also songs. Right? So this, we're already talking all about, we are losing a lot of revenue because people are not willing to come here and do events. With such a law, what more?
Okay. And there's also, I think, this part about the control of online platforms, where they have talked about how it is possible to compel some of these media platforms to release certain personal information with regards to certain people who may have posted certain things online, but on an anonymous basis, for example, or using different handles, right? So I think all these things, shows to me that these amendments to CMA, although there are some parts which I think can be supported, like some of the stronger action recommendations and also punishments against, child pornography, and trying to use social media to go and groom young children and things like those. I think are fine. I don't think CIJ is protesting against those. Although they said it would probably be better to strengthen other laws to take care of these kinds of issues more specifically. I think on the most part, most people who cover these issues from a media perspective, their sort of like response has been quite negative on the whole.
Yeah. I think it's a very dangerous law to have. Agree when it comes to child pornography, all those kind of things. I think there should be even a stricter law on it. But that's well defined. The question is the well defined part.
Right. And maybe just one final note, I'm trying to anticipate whether or not this law would be used against any podcasts in the near future, because these podcasts or the podcast hosts may be guilty of saying something that is deemed to be offensive to certain people, right? It will be interesting to see because we all know which is the most popular and most watched political podcast in Malaysia. It's not ours, although I see that in some of the rankings we are maybe top 5 but it's kelas sekejap, right? So if let's say they get any of this, and in fact some of Kyrie's own posts on Instagram have been taken down when he questioned the sort of like privatization of MAHB, including a sale of 15% to an entity that is acquired, that was acquired by BlackRock. So even those posts were taken out for different reasons. So it will be interesting to see whether or not any podcast will be targeted using these updated laws.
Yeah, so do you think it will be approved?
I think it will be approved because the government now has a 2/3 majority. If it's going to be debated in this session, I definitely think there will be approved. So it's a question of whether or not the government feels that it can answer all these questions that have been brought up by civil society for it to be debated and approved, because it's already in the second reading. So to take it to the next step would be to have it to be debated in Parliament and to be approved in the third reading.
So the only thing here, right, I have to also say that like, it's quite disappointing to look at all the political parties that we have supported, we have believed that it's supposed to champion certain rights. And now suddenly changes the whole things around. I think, while we do have the major two-third opportunity, but you don't have to operate mindlessly lah. That's what I think lah, right? Yeah. And when certain voting comes in play, it doesn't mean that when you're against one or two things, you're against your leadership in general. Yeah. But who am I to say? Because I'm not in it. We are just
I disagree with that. I think now that we have a voice through this podcast.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, we should express our views on this and to say that look, this was a position that would not have been taken by PH when they were in opposition. That's Suddenly, right. When they are in power now, when PH is in part of government now, and in fact leading the government through PMX, suddenly the amendments in this particular case are seen as even more regressive compared to what was there in the past. Right? So I think this is something that I think voters should be aware of, and for us, it's about educating you guys and trying to explain to you the repercussions and the implications of these kinds of policies. Maybe one last thing. My sense is that, for this amendment, it's under the Ministry of Communications. My sense is, again, trying to make an educated guess, is that the minister in question, Fahmi, is trying to put these things into place to create the narrative that they are trying to defend, let's say, the royalty, or to try to protect the 3R space, to make the opposition more responsible. Right, so that may be the putative or purported rationale, but the actual implementation of these amendments would be such that it will open up a lot of opportunities for this to be abused.
That's right. Yeah,
and I think that's what we are worried about.
What more if one day you're no more the government?
Correct.
You're literally opening up, that opportunity. It's literally like saying that. Oh, from tomorrow onwards, it's okay to use a knife and stab someone. Anything else is not okay. Just the knife. Because you thought you are selling the knives and you're in control of all the knives. What if tomorrow you're no more selling the knives?
And then let's say you are no longer selling the knives. The other side comes out with, a bigger knife, automated knife. That they can fire, 20 times a minute,
that's right.
Versus one knife that you can just stab once or twice per minute, right?
It's not. It's in fact, in my opinion, it is a very unwise move that harms yourself in the long term.
And probably one final note on this, I think if let's say this passes, and if let's say there's one day, that this current government does not continue in power, which may likely be the case given the fragile nature of this unity coalition, so to speak. And if let's say this law is used against people in PH or in UMNO by other parties, PH will have no credibility to say that that you shouldn't be using these laws, because they will come back and say, you're the ones who passed them. We're just using the laws that you pass to protect this space that you wanted to so-called protect.
And by then, you think you want to start a podcast to actually become the voice,
A bit too late lah.
Maybe you're not even allowed to have a podcast. Right? You get what I'm saying, right?
Hopefully it doesn't come to that. But we just want to raise up these issues so that, hopefully people will listen, and I'm sure some of my friends will listen. You will be more educated and maybe do the right thing and not debate and pass these amendments as they stand during this particular session.
I think those that we voted in, what I can say is that this is not what we voted for, at least in my opinion.
All right. So with that, I think very information-packed filled podcast, this covering 4 segments. So hope for your continued support, and we'll see you next week where we'll have a special guest that will talk about different grades given to the government.
All right, see you guys next week.